Silent seekers, what's the most terrifying experience you've ever had that left you questioning reality?
There was something unsettling about the house on Hollow Street. People whispered about its haunted past, claiming they heard voices when the wind howled through the trees or saw shadows moving when no one was home. But to me, it was just an old, abandoned house that had stood empty for decades, forgotten and overgrown. It seemed harmless, like all the ghost stories around it were just exaggerated tales. But that changed one stormy evening when my friends and I dared each other to go inside. The moment we crossed the threshold, I felt it, an oppressive weight that made my skin crawl. The house felt alive, like it had been waiting for someone to come. And then I saw it, the first shadow. At first glance, it looked like a trick of the light, but when it started to move on its own, my heart began to pound. This was no ordinary shadow. It clung to the walls, shifting and twisting as if it were watching us. And as the storm outside intensified, I quickly realized this was no simple ghost story. The house was hungry. The walls groaned under the pressure of the storm as we huddled in the center of the old living room, our flashlights flickering in and out. The air was thick with dust and the musty scent of rotting wood. It had only been a few minutes since we entered, but the house already felt like it was closing in on us. "I think we should leave," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind howling outside. "We haven't even made it to the second floor," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But even I could feel the weight of dread pressing down on me. The shadows continued to move. At first, they seemed confined to the corners of the room, slithering along the walls, but then they started creeping closer, their edges sharp and jagged like broken glass. My flashlight flickered and went out completely, plunging us into near darkness. That's when I heard it, a faint, raspy whisper, like someone was breathing just behind us. But when we turned, there was no one there. "Who's there?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. No one answered, but the whispering grew louder, more distinct. The shadows on the walls grew taller, darker, until they loomed over us, their inky black forms stretching toward the ceiling. Then one of the shadows broke away from the wall. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, gliding across the floor, circling us like a predator stalking its prey. The whispering stopped, and for a brief moment, there was complete silence. Then, the floorboards beneath Jake creaked. Before anyone could react, the shadow lunged, its form enveloping him in a suffocating darkness. His scream was cut short as his body was swallowed whole, leaving nothing but an empty space where he once stood. Panic erupted. Emma bolted for the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening crash, trapping us inside. The remaining shadows on the walls writhed with a newfound energy, as if the house had tasted blood and wanted more. "We have to get out," I shouted, but my voice was drowned out by the sound of the walls groaning again, louder this time. The shadows were closing in, growing larger with every second, their forms almost human but twisted and malformed. I backed up, my heart pounding in my chest, as the largest of the shadows detached itself from the wall. It towered over me, its face, or what I assumed was its face, was a void of swirling darkness. It reached out with a long, clawed hand, its touch freezing cold. Suddenly, I heard a familiar voice. "Sarah, help me." It was Jake's voice, weak and distorted, coming from inside the shadow. I could see his face now, trapped within the inky blackness, his eyes wide with terror. But it was too late. The house had claimed him, just as it would claim us all. The walls shifted, creaking as if they were alive, as more shadows began to emerge, each one more grotesque than the last. I could feel the coldness creeping up my spine as one of them reached for me. I screamed, but the shadow swallowed the sound. And then, everything went black. The house on Hollow Street remains silent now, untouched for years. But on stormy nights, if you stand close enough, you might hear the faint sound of whispering. And if you're brave enough to look through the windows, you might see them, the shadows, watching, waiting for their next victim.